Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and we are broadcasting live on August 27th from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. Later on in the show, we're going to talk with two of the defendants in an upcoming trial who've been charged by the government of spreading Russian propaganda to influence American elections. But the Uhuru Three say they were exercising their First Amendment rights to political expression. So that's coming up in a bit. But first, we're going to speak with Cathy Salustri, the owner of the Gabber newspaper in Pinellas County and the author of a new book called Florida Spectacular, which comes out next Tuesday. Welcome to Tuesday Cafe, Cathy.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sean. It's great to be here.
I'm really glad you could come on the show. Thanks for coming on. So let's talk about your book first. Why the title Florida Spectacular?
Florida Spectacular because I am tired of people trashing the state that I love. And I had this watershed moment 20 some odd years ago, 9/11. I ended up at a business conference in San Diego on 9/11 and ended up taking a Greyhound bus cross country to get back home. And I remember it was a days-long endeavor. The whole world was in tumult. And when we crossed the Florida state line, the people on the bus cheered. And I remember thinking, man, people are just happy to be home, happy to be back in Florida. And that moment stuck with me as it became increasingly popular to talk about Florida man or how stupid Florida is. And I think, if we're so stupid, why is everybody moving here? Why does everybody want to come here? Why are we the fourth largest state? Why are we so fast growing? There must be something right with us. And so if you pull at that thread, there's actually a lot about Florida that is, it's spectacular in a word. It's a pretty great place.
What you're doing right now is you're what you describe as Florida-splaining, kind of telling the good news about Florida.
I was so happy when that word made it to the index of the book, Florida-splaining. The idea is that you read this book and each chapter is self-contained. And the next time you're at, some event or you're visiting, you have relatives from out of town who hate us, but they come here because they want to see Florida. And they say, well, Florida's so stupid. Florida man, you can go, well, actually, did you know? And then launch into one of the many fun things that we talk about in the book. That's Florida-splaining.
And that's what we'll be talking about for part of this interview, at least, because the chapters of your book are some of the things that make Florida special. For example, what can you tell us about Florida history? For example, there were all sorts of battles and tug of wars between French settlers and Spanish settlers and the English. So tell us something that we should know about Florida history.
Everything. Everything you've been taught is wrong. So we'll start with the 13, I'm making air quotes, original colonies. Complete and utter falsehood. I know that is going to upset a lot of people in Boston, but it was not the 13 original colonies. Those are the 13 of the 22 colonies that chose to have, at the time, Floridians would have called it an insurrection against the king, because when the 13 colonies revolted against the crown, there were two Floridas. There was East Florida and West Florida, and West Florida went from basically the Mississippi River to Apalachicola, and East Florida was Apalachicola to the Atlantic. And they were so incensed that there would be a Declaration of Independence or the Articles of Confederation that they burned, I believe, John Hancock and Thomas Jefferson in effigies in St. Augustine Square. They were absolutely outraged. And so what happened is anybody who was a Tory, who was a loyalist to the crown, fled to the Florida colonies, and they supported the crown during, again, they called it an insurrection. Now, we also had some colonies that became Canadian, but that was the first time Florida was on the losing end of a war, and as a result, Florida's been written out of history so many times. There's so many times in Florida history where we played a pivotal role. The Revolution. Obviously, it didn't go the way those Floridians wanted it to go. The War of 1812 was another time when, at that point, England had lost what we call the Revolutionary War, and those two Floridas were now Spanish-held. But in the War of 1812, the rest of the world was so worried about this growing United States that it was just going to take over everything, that essentially everybody banded against Spanish Florida, the Brits, the American Indians all banded together to try and stop the expansion of the United States. Again, didn't work out well. We have very rarely been on the right side of a war or the winning side of a war. And there's that great African proverb that until lions have their own historians, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So um, I want to note that I have a master's degree in Florida Studies from USF St. Pete. I didn't learn about that in grad school. I learned about that through some other research I was doing with the Seminole Tribe of Florida.
In 1763, Spain gave up Florida for Havana, and the war between England and Spain, that's called the War of Jenkins' Ear. What's that all about?
So Florida, I think I say this in the book, for a couple of centuries, Florida was like the most popular girl in high school. Everybody wanted to hang out with her. And it wasn't so much our sandy beaches, definitely didn't have a theme park here yet, but it was the waters around us. They wanted to control the waters, and whoever controlled Florida could control the Caribbean, at least this part of it. And as you may imagine, getting over to Mexico, getting to South America, all these things were becoming important on a global scale. So the War of Jenkins' Ear, I say, if this had gone differently, we would be having a lot more chicken cordon bleu and French dishes instead of black beans and rice in Florida. It actually took place Georgia, Florida, and the reason we call it the War of Jenkins' Ear is there was a man named Jenkins, and supposedly soldiers cut off his ear, and the British were so incensed by this, they sent Jenkins' ear back to the king, and that was what launched the war. Now, that does not hold up as much as that's a fun story and a great name for a war, because there's really no way in any century, maybe now, that an ear could survive a transatlantic passage and make it back. But I love that that was one where the National Institute of Health actually studied that account of the War of Jenkins' Ear and where the ear would have been cut off. And it's just fun to say the War of Jenkins' Ear.
Our guest is Cathy Salustri, the owner of the Gabber newspaper in Pinellas County and the author of a new book, Florida Spectacular. This is Tuesday Cafe. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa, and I'm Sean Canan. So far, we've talked a lot about history, but much of your book is really about appreciating the environment of Florida right now. For example, you and your family really appreciate Florida's springs. What can you tell our audience that they might not know about Florida water and Florida springs?
Oh, well, the first thing is that there is nowhere else on the planet that has a higher concentration of springs than Florida. We have almost 1,000 freshwater springs. They are all connected by a common source, which is the Floridan Aquifer, which is just this beautiful pressurized limestone underground tunnel of water that starts in South Carolina, and it feeds all these springs, and it gives us some of the purest water on the planet, and we're very fortunate for that. That is, of course, till it gets to the surface, and then it has to contend with nutrients, which is a healthy sounding word for some bad sounding things like fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides. That can change the water quality. But coming from the aquifer, these springs are issuing for some of the cleanest, purest water on the planet. They're magic.
What's your favorite spring?
Oh, don't ask me that. That's like asking me to pick a favorite cheese. I really, they're all different. I know people say, oh, they're a spring, but I can't tell you a favorite. I can tell you one of my favorite moments at a spring was years ago, before it was quite as crowded as it is now. I took my husband, we were camping, we were working on my first book, and we were at Wekiva Springs State Park. And before we got to our campsite, there was a storm coming. And I said, let's go down to the spring. The spring head is there. And he had heard me talk about springs. He had been to some smaller ones that really weren't as significant. But the look on his face when he saw Wekiva Springs, it was like, he's like, I had no idea. And it made me realize that as environmentalists, we do a really good job about talking about, we have to protect this, we have to save this. But I don't think sometimes we do as good of a job as we can of talking about the sheer beauty and wonder. Like, not so much we have to save it, but why we have to protect it. What is so amazing, and allowing people to experience it.
I'm going to talk about the Florida Panthers now for a second, right? Just now, what's the we know that the Florida Panther population is very low compared to how it was before humans arrived in Florida. But what's the significance of having female panthers north of the Caloosahatchee River? Why is that important, and how recent of a development is that?
Okay, so first of all, it is lowest. I just want to go back and just tweak something you said. The population is not low because of humans. It is low because European Americans. The ancestors of the Seminole and the Miccosukee did a far better job with sustainability. It was when we came here and decided to alter the landscape that really imperiled the panther. And that relates exactly to the female panthers not wanting to go north of the Caloosahatchee. We know that male panthers need roughly 200 square miles to do all the panther things they want to do. And the male panthers have been pretty good about crossing the river. Once upon a time, by the way, the Caloosahatchee did not connect all the way to Lake Okeechobee, so it was much easier for cats to get farther north in Florida. That is one of the things that we did as European Americans when we came here, is we decided the river needed to connect, made it harder. Cats, by the way, are excellent swimmers. If you don't believe me, take your house cat, throw it in your swimming pool. Cat will hate you forever, but it's going to swim great. The females, though, were reticent to cross this river. So we had this wonderful program that is really a testament to what you can do if you decide you want to stop a species from going extinct. And we had reintroduced some cats to South Florida. They bred. We started to see more panther kits. We started to see more male panthers crossing, but the female panthers wouldn't cross the Caloosahatchee River. So the male panthers could only go so far, because they could go wander up the Kissimmee River Valley. They could follow, some cattle ranches. There's a lot of green space they could still go to. But if they wanted to make more kittens or more panthers, they had to go back south to find the females. And it was a huge, huge triumph a few years ago when a contractor, Jennifer Korn, she was a contractor working for the FWC, and she was monitoring the camera feed. And I saw her speak right after it happened. It was a very informal gathering, and she talked about checking the camera and having to check the location a couple of times, because it was a female panther with, I believe, 2 kittens, and the camera was very clearly north of the Caloosahatchee. And it was this great moment, because we had reintroduced, we had gotten the species to start breeding again, but we knew that until we could get those females north of the Caloosahatchee, it was going to be an issue. Like, there were going to be too many panthers for the species to thrive south of the Caloosahatchee. So this was the first sign that we saw that we were doing something else right, that Florida had done something worthwhile, something markedly different, that we were going to be able to see hope for this big cat species.
Our guest is Cathy Salustri, the owner of the Gabber newspaper in Pinellas County, and she's author of the new book, Florida Spectacular. This is Tuesday Cafe. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF Tampa. I'm Sean Canan, and we're live on the 27th of August. And the reason I say that is because I'm going to read a few emails that have come in. Some people are responding to the interview, so I want to just read through a couple of these, and maybe you can respond if you feel that it's appropriate. Someone from the 239 area code says, "It's my job. In my job, I deal with new homeowners, usually from up north, and they're almost all brainwashed Trump cult members moving here because of the lack of income tax and an unjustified reverence for our fascist governor." That's part of what 239 is writing. Also, Jessica writes, "I can't wait to read your book. Thank you for putting this together." So thanks for that comment, Jessica. And Greg asks a question that maybe, Cathy, you know the answer to. Has your guest heard the Native American legend that North America is a deer on which Florida is the nose that will one day fall off? Well, those are some of the comments that have come in during the interview. If you want to respond to any of those, or I can ask you about the Florida Wildlife Corridor.
Well, I would love to first thank Jessica. I don't know where you are, Jessica. I hope you can come out. I have signings and book talks all over the state, and would love to see you at one. Um, Not going to touch much about the Trump governor comment, except to say I wish that we could find ways to recoup that income tax because I think our wildlife would benefit from it and our natural environment would benefit from it. And then as for the legend about the deer on the nose, one of the chapters in the book, I worked very closely with the Seminole tribe of Florida, and I was very fortunate that after a couple of years of working on this chapter, I did get the tribe to sign off on it because I was adamant that I was not going to write something about a group of people without the group of people saying that I had gotten it right, because there are a lot of books out there about different tribes that haven't really talked to the tribes. We call it the white man's version of history or colonialism. So in writing this chapter, I spent some time down at Atatiki at the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, talking to people, talking to staff there, talking to or going through their archive room, which is incredible. It's just a beautiful, beautiful archive room. And the one thing that I came to understand, and that we could do a better job teaching kids in elementary school and middle grades, high school, is that just as you can't look at a group of white people and say, oh, they all think this, or a group of gay people and say, oh, well, they all believe this, or a group of black people and say, oh, they all think this. You can't say all American Indians believe this. For example, I use the term American Indian when I am referring to the Seminole tribe of Florida, because when I asked them what they preferred, indigenous, native, they said American Indian. So that's what I use. Other tribes feel different. So the short answer after my long explanation of that is no, I have not heard that. I have read a bit from the tribe about different clans that they had not heard that legend, but just because that is not something I know that the Seminole tribe of Florida doesn't have in a lot of its records doesn't mean that it doesn't belong to another tribe of American Indians or indigenous people. So, and I'd love to talk about the corridor or our parks, whatever you want, any of our natural areas.
Yeah, so in 2021, the legislator created a $400 million fund for the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Maybe you can tie that into how important that is to the Panthers, or just talk about the wildlife corridor in general, about why it's important to the state and to wildlife.
Well, I'm sure Mallory like Stimmett or Carlton Ward or somebody could speak more eloquently on this, but I have a lot of strong feelings about why the corridor works, and part of it, yes, is the panther. Part of it is honestly global warming. Part of it is that I am always impressed by what we can do when we get a little pragmatic about things, right? So the corridor starts in Big Cypress, which is in South Florida, Big Cypress National Preserve, moves up across the state, and there are a lot of different types of land in the corridor. There's private land, there's public land, Disney Wilderness Preserve, which I also write about in the book as part of the corridor. So we have national parks, privately held reserves, we have private land. And yes, it's been incredibly important for not only the panther, but other animals in Florida to be able to migrate, to follow some semblance of what would have been their historic migratory patterns. So it's a beautiful way to engage different stakeholders in Florida. And another thing that I find so significant about the corridor is that it helps show people that you don't have to be extreme. Like, I am probably one of the most extreme liberal people you will meet. And that's okay. I know where to use it and where not to. But when it comes to things like the environment, I believe we have to be more pragmatic than I would want to be in my own personal life. We can't say we need to get rid of all the farms and have parks, or we can't say we need to get rid of all the cattle ranches and have parks. So what we do, and what I think the beauty of the Florida Wildlife Corridor does, is they meet people where they are. They go to the ranchers and they say, look, if we can get a conservation easement, if you sell us your development rights, we're going to pay you for it. And we're going to let you stay here and you can ranch cattle forever. But what you can't do is sell your land to a developer who's going to put a suburb there. And in doing that, they're preserving a lot of different parts of Florida. Yes, it's super important to have the green space and carbon sequestration so that we can mitigate some of what we're seeing with climate change. Yes, it's super important to be able to have those migratory pathways and the green space for wildlife. But on a cultural level, it's also super important that we preserve these folkways in Florida, that we preserve cattle ranching in Florida. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where people don't eat meat or drink milk. I don't eat it that much. I don't really drink milk, but I understand a lot of people do. And you can't just simply say, rip it all down. And cattle ranching goes back hundreds of years, 500 years. Ponce de Leon, the Spanish conquistadors, brought the first herd of cattle to the United States through Florida, the Andalusian cattle. And that's always there. And if we let that get sold, I say if we let it become a Michael's and a Dick's Sporting Goods and a Kohl's, we're losing a part of our culture. And I don't think that's acceptable. I think that that's part of what makes Florida, Florida, just as much as the trees and the springs and the panther.
Let's talk. We can come back to the book in just a moment if we need to, but let's talk about what's going on right now when it comes to Florida and nature. The big news story of the last 7 or 8 days has been a proposal to add things like hotels, golf courses, and pickleball courts to Florida state parks. Now, there's been a lot of pushback, a ton. There's been huge demonstrations, and there's going to be one that we're reporting on this afternoon at Honeymoon Island. So, Cathy, what kind of insight can you give us about this proposal to kind of make private development happening at the Florida state parks?
So, first of all, it should not happen. It's awful. There is a form that the DEP has for people to fill out and give feedback. And I went through and I gave feedback on every single one of the proposals. And the only one that I 100% favored was adding some more camping facilities. My first book, Backroads of Paradise, which was published in 2016, when I was working on that, we spent a month traveling what are now the backroads of Florida. We were in a camper van, and for all but 2 nights of that month, we spent the night in Florida state parks. One of those nights, we had to stay at a private campground, and it was anathema to everything I love about Florida. And if you love going to a private campground and having a swimming pool and racquetball and a game room, go to a private campground. But our state parks are not part of a separate parks department. They're part of the Department of Environmental Protection. And the DEP's mission is pretty clear. It's to protect the environment. And when we talk about removing part of the natural environment to put in a golf course, that is not with the DEP's mission. In addition, it competes with private industry. I do not believe the government should compete with private businesses. I think private businesses should be able to succeed on their own without having to fight a government that can do it for a lot cheaper. When we talk about those lodges, they call them lodges, and I find that just an adorable bit of spin, because they compare it to the Wakulla Springs Lodge up in the Panhandle. What they aren't saying is that, first of all, that lodge is a historic lodge. It was there before it was a park. It was not built by the DEP. It was part of an area that the DEP deemed important to protect, and it already had the lodge there, and it's 27 rooms. What the DEP is proposing is several 350-room hotels. They're hotels, and again, one of them's going at they want to put it in at Anastasia State Park, which was right by St. Augustine. Well, if you've driven US 1 or A1A, there is no shortage of lodging there. There's no dearth of quality inns. Anastasia has camping. It has RV camping. It has tent camping. I don't think that there's a reason to go there to stay in a hotel when you can go to any hotel on the beach, and it's a small park. Now, pickleball, I get it. People love pickleball. I have a pickleball racket. I get it. The state parks are not the place for that. If the state feels so very strongly that we are suffering from a lack of pickleball courts, you know what? Give the counties and cities money to buy some of these properties. Every county in the state has properties in their county or city limits that are probably either in foreclosure, neglected, abandoned, have code liens. Give the money to the cities and counties and let them do that and create a pickleball court. Because when you do it in a state park, you're paving for the court, you're paving for parking. Finally, I mean, there's more. I could do this for 2 hours. The biggest thing to me is that the state's making it sound like these parks are suffering for attendance, and that's patently not true. Um, I go to these parks. I spend time in these parks. There are lines to get in these parks. Some of these parks close for capacity on the weekends. We don't need to do anything else to drive people to the parks. What we need to be doing is creating more state parks. And that's where I would like to see our priorities shift instead of trying to decide where to put a mega hotel.
Our guest is Cathy Salustri, the owner of the Gabber newspaper in Pinellas County and the author of a new book, Florida Spectacular. This is Tuesday Cafe, and we're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa. I'm Sean Canan. So let's talk about the Gabber. What is the Gabber? How long have you owned it? What brought you to own the Gabber, and what do you hope to do with it?
Thanks for asking. The Gabber newspaper is the oldest independent weekly newspaper, not an alt weekly, not a niche paper. We are the oldest one in Florida, which isn't even that old. It was started in 1968. We are the fourth owners. We bought it during the pandemic. I freelanced for the paper for, 13 years, left, worked for another publication, freelanced again, wrote a book, all that stuff. And one of my close friends was the editor, and during the early stages of the pandemic, she called me and said, hey, just so you know, they're going to close the paper this week. And it bothered me. So I wrote a piece for the Tampa Bay Times about what it meant to South Pinellas, or essentially Gulfport and the beaches, to lose its newspaper. And the Times, at the end of the piece, put my email address, and I started getting emails from people going, oh, I remember so-and-so or this and that. And I would pass them on to the people who still owned it. And one of the two owners responded and said, I don't know what we're going to do with this. So-and-so wants to sell. I'm not sure I do. And I said, well, if you decide you want to sell, let me know. And by the end of the week, long story short, we had a deal to buy the paper, and brought it back to print the second week of July 2020. And it's really been interesting because the paper was started in 1968 by a gentleman and his wife, George Braun, and he didn't like what was happening at Gulfport City Hall. And he wanted to essentially, I want to just make people know what's going on. And that's kind of continued. But what's really interesting is that the paper started covering other cities in the early 90s. And now, with the lack of consistent coverage of any of the smaller cities in Pinellas County, we have 24 cities here. We get emails and phone calls from people saying, can you please cover our city hall? Something's happening. Can you look into this? And we have now expanded. We're covering 4 cities on the beach. We're looking for reporters and revenue to cover more. We've seen a news desert created by the daily paper of record that only covers the larger cities. And so we're finding a lot of opportunity to go in there. And, we had a case where the Madeira Beach mayor resigned claiming corruption. And that was a really interesting story. And people are hungry for this news. People want to know what's happening in their backyard. It's something they have control over. Like, you might not have a lot of control over what happens in DC. You might not have as much control as you'd like over what happens in Tallahassee. But you can, if you know what's going on, you have the power to change what's happening on your block and in your city.
And during Tropical Storm Debbie a few weeks ago, the Gabber was right there for the coverage of a really sad story that happened. There was a death locally in Gulfport. What can you tell our audience about Brian J. Clough and about the boating community and their response before and after the storm?
So we have Gulfport. Our offices are in downtown Gulfport. Gulfport is on Boca Ciega Bay. There is a barrier island between Boca Ciega Bay and the Gulf of Mexico. So it's this place where boaters like to come, and some boaters anchor. The city of Gulfport also has a mooring field. Some boaters pay to be on the mooring field. And all bets are kind of off when a storm is coming. public safety officials try and convince boaters who are anchored to move their boats. They're not always successful. Brian, I did not know Brian, and I guess his solution, I believe, as I understand it from his fellow boaters, he was trying to set out more anchors. He was anchored. He was not on a mooring ball. He was, his boat didn't quite stay in place. And the boating community, there's been a lot of some people are very supportive. Some people, this is a little bit of a hot button issue because some people don't feel like boaters are responsible. And that's not true. Some boaters, yes. Some people buy a boat they can't afford and it ends up turning to junk. But the majority of boaters I know are responsible, who, they are taking care of their craft. And bad things happen sometimes. And
I want to interject here for a second.
Yes.
Right now, when we say the word boaters, we're not talking about recreational boaters who take their boats out on Sunday. We're talking about people who live aboard their vessels out in Boca Ciega Bay.
Right. We also have cruisers who maybe don't live aboard their vessels, maybe have a home somewhere, but they're on a quest, on a journey. So this is where it gets a little murky. We're talking about these liveaboards. I believe Brian was a liveaboard. I don't think he was cruising. It was incredibly tragic, and it was also upsetting to watch how the story unfolded, because there's a difference between how a local newspaper covers something and perhaps a TV affiliate, because the news stations love to come to Gulfport and they film themselves with the background with the waves. And I saw a lot of that. And my editorial staff and I, we have the high water boots. We walked down to see what was going on. And in talking to people, we found out about Brian. And it kind of upset me that these other people were there just getting these beautiful, keep people watching for ratings backdrops, but they weren't talking to any of these people. And there was this whole community right there that was furiously trying to find out what had happened to a few boaters. I mean, we talked a lot in Louisiana about the Cajun Navy. It was something very similar to that, where the local boaters, whether they lived on a boat or whether they had a boat and lived on land, were really mounting this grassroots effort to find these people. And they did find some people. There were more people missing at the start of the day than there were at the end. Most of them were found alive. These wonderful men and women, they didn't get to Brian in time. I still don't know exactly what his time of death was. And honestly, I just wish his family the best. They're going through a horrible time. But they did find his dog. They saved his little dog. And, it's these are the stories I think that we need to amplify, is that in these horrible times, there are still really good people. And they were doing everything they could to help each other. And I wish that everybody wanted to tell those stories instead of going for some more sensational things. But that's my own rant. I apologize.
Well, no, thank you for that, because I think it was a really important story that happened during the hurricane. And the Gabber told it very well, in my opinion. And it's something that now we're going to be watching out for the next time a storm comes, is how the community responds to the boating community before the storm and during the storm. And I want to thank you very much for joining us today, Cathy. Thanks for coming on Tuesday Cafe.
Oh, thank you, Sean. This has been great, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.
All right, thank you, you too. Cathy Salustri's new book is called Florida Spectacular, and if you missed any of this interview, you can watch it later today on WMNF.org. This is Tuesday Cafe. We're broadcasting from the studios of WMNF in Tampa, and we're going to turn now to our next topic. 2 years ago, the FBI raided the Uhuru House in St. Petersburg. Then last year, 3 members of the African People's Socialist Party, or the Uhurus, were charged with covertly spreading Russian propaganda and illegally interfering in U.S. elections to sow discord in U.S. society. We're going to speak now to 2 of the defendants. They are known as the Uhuru 3, and they'll go on trial starting next Tuesday. And they're joining us by Zoom right now, and I want to welcome in Omali Yeshitela and Jesse Neville. Welcome to WMNF's Tuesday Cafe, Omali Yeshitela. Can you unmute yourself, please? I see that you're muted. Can you? Hi, Jesse Neville, are you there?
I'm here, yes. Hello, Sean.
Hi, thanks for joining us, and we're trying to get Omali Yeshitela unmuted, but thanks for joining us. So what can you tell us about what happened on the day the FBI raided the Uhuru House?
So, yes, hopefully Chairman O'Malley will be able to join us shortly. But in the meantime, yes, I would say on July 29th, 2022, the U.S. government, through the FBI, its secret political police, carried out a pre-dawn coordinated military-style SWAT team violent raid on 7 homes and offices of the Uhuru movement, including the home of Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and the leader of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, and his wife, who's also a leader in the Uhuru movement, Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela in North St. Louis, Missouri, along with several other properties, including the Uhuru House, where I'm sitting right now, the historic African community organizing center and cultural space here in South St. Petersburg. And they handcuffed Chairman O'Malley and others. They came with flashbang grenades. They came with battering rams and carried out this 6 or 7 hour process of looting these properties of decades worth of archives and electronics, phones, notebooks, calendars, and 9 months later came out with a bogus indictment against Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Penny Hess, who is the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and myself on manufactured charges that Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru movement have been working for the liberation and unification of Africa and African people for over 60 years, had suddenly become pawns in a so-called Russian conspiracy to sow discord in the United States.
And one of the things that the FBI said was that this Russian national, Alexander Ionov, he was charged with secretly funding black political groups and directing them to publish pro-Russian propaganda. So what kind of connection, what kind of contact did you have with Ionov?
Well, the charges are completely preposterous and untrue. Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru Three are not guilty of these bogus charges. And I see the chairman has just joined us, so I'm going to defer to the chairman.
Welcome to Tuesday Cafe, Omali Yeshitela. How would you like to respond to that?
Thank you so much. Again, I just want to say that all of the charges that they made against us are just absolutely absurd. They would try to compress 60 years of history, of our history. It's been consistent. It's been a part of your history at WMNF, the work that I've been doing, and it's always been consistent. There's nothing that different now than we're doing than what we did then. And in terms of the Russian government paying us to do anything, we've never taken a penny from the Russian government. We had a relationship with a non-governmental organization in Russia, just as we've had relationships with non-governmental organizations in Spain and other places. And the fact is that I think they claim that over a 6 or 7 year period, we may have, that this non-governmental organization may have made something like $6,000 or $7,000 contribution and to the work that we were doing. There is nothing that they will ever be able to show that the Russians directed us to do anything, that they would never be able to show. They took enough terabytes in terms of materials from us, as I understand it, that equal to something like 25 million books. And yet they will never be able to show anything. They can show statements that I've made to Comrade Jesse and he to me and Penny Hess, et cetera. They can show, but they will never be able. They claim that this man Alex Ayanov was a Russian agent. That's what they say. But they said W.E.B. Du Bois was a Russian agent. Like they say, I'm a Russian agent. But they will never be able to show anything where there was a communication between the Russian and our party, our movement, that we were accepting directions or leadership from the Russians. They can't show that. They can show that there were instances, a lot of instances perhaps, where we had the same position, for example, around the war in Ukraine. Our position was the same. Therefore, that meant the Russians are the ones who, that meant we were working for the Russians. The Russians supported verbally our position around reparations or the opposition that we had to genocide, and the thing that we were taking goes all the way back from our own party to 1982, where we had an international conference in Brooklyn, New York, charged the United States with violation of the United Nations Convention on the Crime of Genocide as it relates to Black people. So there is, it's absolutely absurd what it is that they have charged us with having done.
So this man, Alexander Ayanov, who is a Russian national and was charged as well by the FBI, you went to Russia and you met with him in 2015, but you're saying that he wasn't an agent of the Russian government. You were just talking politics.
I don't know if he was an agent. I asked him at one juncture if this organization, this anti-globalization movement that they were part of, I asked him one time if it were something that was funded by the Russian government or was the Russian government, and he said no. But I went to Russia because we were offered an opportunity to come and meet with groups from around the world. Many of whom had the same kind of interest in terms of struggle against colonialism, for self-determination. And they came from Spain, they came from Ireland, they came from Hawaii, they came from various places around the world, Puerto Rico. So we look forward to that because the struggle of our people could not get any traction when it comes to bourgeois media, to the media that's controlled by this country. So to break out of this encirclement was really important to us, and to win support from all around the world. That's why we went to Russia. And we met with a lot of different people who expressed unity, solidarity with our struggle. And we were opposed, and I want to be clear on this, because we were opposed to what the United States was doing through NATO. In terms of this attack on Russia that had been going on for something like 8 years, even before it broke out into much of the public attention outside of Europe, perhaps. And we had seen this attack on Russia that was something that started more than 100 years ago, right after the Russian Revolution, when all of the colonial powers, including the United States and Japan, invaded Russia. Because Russia was connected to the struggles of oppressed peoples around the world and was talking about working people coming to power. And so we saw that happen, and we saw that since that time there's been an ongoing process of aggression against Russia. So we didn't see history just beginning. We didn't even see it starting just with the CIA involvement in overthrowing the Ukrainian government in 2014. There's not even much debate around that. We didn't even see it happening when the United States contrived and created the modern jihad through helping to destroy the government of Afghanistan, because it was on the border of Russia, because it was a friend of Russia, et cetera. So we're saying it started even longer than that. Our position is even different from the Russians. Yeah.
Our guests are two of the Uhuru Three, Omali Yeshitela and Jesse Neville. They go on trial next week. This is Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan, and I'm going to read from an amicus brief that the National Lawyers Guild wrote on behalf of your case that goes to trial, as I said, beginning next week. The Chicago chapter filed a 25-page brief in support of the three defendants regarding their First Amendment and what the Lawyers Guild says is the historical context regarding suppressed Black political expression. Defendants' alleged misconduct is inextricably intertwined with their political views, governmental suppression of Black voices, and political expression in the United States. So this is the National Lawyers Guild Chicago chapter backing the three of you in your defense against these charges by the FBI. What are your thoughts on what I just read there?
Jesse, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, Chairman. Yes, I think the amicus brief filed by the National Lawyers Guild Chicago chapter was very important, and it was bolstering arguments that were set forth brilliantly by one of our attorneys, Leonard Goodman, who last year filed a motion for the dismissal of this bogus indictment based on the grounds that the indictment itself, let alone what the outcome of the case could be, but the indictment itself constituted a blatant violation of the supposed constitutionally protected First Amendment right to freedom of speech. This law that they're using to target Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru movement, it's called the Agents of Foreign Governments Act, 18 U.S.C. Section 951. This is, according to Attorney Leonard Goodman, the first time in U.S. history that this law has been used to target pure political speech. In every previous instance, which is not to say that those were legitimate prosecutions either, but nonetheless, in every previous instance, when someone has been charged under 18 U.S.C. 951, they've been accused of something beyond speech, whether it's espionage, bribery, corruption, something to that effect. But in this case, every single so-called overt act that the United States government alleges was carried out in furtherance of this bogus conspiracy is free speech. It's publishing a petition to charge the United States government with the crime of genocide against African people. It's holding a tour to speak out for reparations to the Black community. It's holding press conferences using the Burning Spear newspaper. So this is also a free press question that we're looking at. And not only is it constitutionally protected free speech, but it's free speech consistent with more than 50 or 60 years of political work by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, which has been consistent in its message and in its agenda of pursuing the self-determination of African people and winning international support around the world for the struggle of African people for their liberation. That's why so many people from around the world have rallied behind this case from across the political spectrum, because they see it as the tip of the spear for the struggle for democratic rights and free speech. And that's why on August 31st in St. Petersburg, Florida, there will be a massive anti-colonial free speech rally with people from all different organizations and political backgrounds coming together to say, drop the charges on the Uhuru Three and hands off Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And that will be on August 31st at 11 a.m. at the Uhuru House in St. Petersburg at 1245 18th Avenue South.
And Omali Yeshitela, if convicted of these charges, you could face up to 15 years in prison?
That's right. And I think there's a serious intent to imprison me for life, which is the equivalent of a life sentence for me. But it's consistent with what is talked about in the amicus brief from the National Lawyers Guild. This ongoing assault on certain kind of politics coming from our community, from the African community. You don't see. There are certain organizations, Black organizations, some of them have been around for a long time. You don't see the federal government making pre-dawn raids on them and making these kinds of accusations. It's a politic of self-determination. The fact that we say that African people have a right to be a free people, be a self-governing people, that we live in a very hostile environment, that it was imposed on us at gunpoint. It's not like the fallacy about America being some kind of nation of immigrants. We say America is not a nation, it's a prison of nations. And Black people did not come here as immigrants, we came here as captives. And even when you look at the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, et cetera, you're talking about something that was ratified by the United States Congress in 1791. Black people were enslaved in 1791. It wasn't for us. And that's just an absolute truth. And they can't get around that truth with flashbang grenades and armored personnel carriers attacking our homes and stealing our resources and trying to poison the opinion of the people in this country who are likely to have to serve on a jury, trying to create a situation where the people will ignore the fact that they have no evidence except that we are Black, except that we are radical, except we believe in self-determination, and except that we went to Russia. And of course, you can't have Russia and Black, and saying that in the same sentence without a certain serious, insidious kind of inference. And that's what the prosecution, that's the only thing it can do. It cannot really legitimately assume that they have evidence that can do this. They hope that they've created enough prejudice within the body politic of this country for that to work.
For our audience who may not know, tell us a little bit about the history of your activism, Omali Yeshitela.
Well, I was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. That's the organization that put the slogan "Demand Black Power" on the agenda in this country and much of the world. It was the bridge, if you will, between the anti-racist civil rights movement and the anti-colonial Black Power movement. That's what SNCC was, the organization that put forth the Black Power demand slogan. In fact, one of the chief proponents, one of the chief people associated with the Black Power demand, he's going to be here on the 31st of September with the rally that we're going to be having. And so that's my history, starts that organized history with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And I became the Florida organizer, Student Nonviolent. I did voter registration work. I was doing that kind of civil rights and voting voting education work even before the passage of the Civil Rights Bill that Joe Biden opposed as a senator, even before this whole notion about busing that Joe Biden opposed as a senator, saying he didn't want his children to have to go to school in a jungle. This is the government that's attacking me right now. So I was a part of that. I was a part of a movement here and did a tremendous amount of work here. When Martin Luther King was killed, I was out. I had been out on bail for 4 days on appeal bond because I had been arrested in 1966 on December 29, 1966, for tearing an 8 by 10 foot mural, horrific mural at the seat of local government power, hanging that had Africans portrayed in just horrendous kind of caricature. And when the government refused to remove it, I took it down. I was with some other people and we took it down during a demonstration. I got sentenced to 5 years in prison for that. I was out on appeal bond for that charge and going to Gainesville, Florida to participate in a rally to free some other people, young people from arrest. And then I got off the bus and learned that King had been assassinated. So, I was involved there. I was the first person arrested in the state of Florida for inciting to riot, a law that they had just created. And where a riot wasn't necessary, I just had to want one to happen. It was a thought crime. It was speech crime, So this is part of my politics, yeah.
And I want to thank you both for coming on Tuesday Cafe. Jesse Neville and Omali Yeshitela, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jesse Neville and Omali Yeshitela are two of the defendants known as the Uhuru Three. They go on trial next Tuesday. There will be a march and rally this Saturday beginning at 11 at the Uhuru House, 1245 18th Avenue South in St. Petersburg. Thanks to my earlier guest, Cathy Salustri. If you missed either of these interviews, you can watch them on WMNF.org. This has been WMNF's Tuesday Cafe. I'm Sean Canan. Coming up next is Wavemakers with Janet and Tom Scherberger. They talk with the Sarasota School Board member Tom Edwards, who was reelected last week despite opposition from Governor Ron DeSantis. This is Tuesday Cafe. Thanks so much for listening to WMNF Tampa, and thanks for your support for community radio.